Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
James never imagined he'd wake up in the middle of the night to find the other side of the bed cold and empty. It wasn't the first time his wife, Lauren, had gotten up in the middle of the night, but something about that particular evening felt different. The resort room was swallowed by darkness, with only the faint moonlight slipping through the partially drawn curtains. He slowly opened his eyes and realized she wasn't in the bathroom. The closet door was shut, and he heard a soft click, the main door being closed with too much care. James lay still for a few seconds, his heart beginning to race. Over the past few months, he'd noticed small changes in Lauren, the way she guarded her phone, how quickly she deleted messages, the increasingly frequent late nights at work. He'd tried talking to her a few times, but she always had a reasonable explanation, and James wanted to believe her. After all, they'd been together for 10 years. Trust was the foundation of everything, right? But now, lying alone in that king-size bed while she snuck out in the dead of night, all those little suspicions he'd tried so hard to ignore came rushing back with full force. It didn't make sense, or maybe it did, and he just hadn't wanted to admit it. Lauren never went out alone at night, especially not in an unfamiliar place. They'd been at the resort for 3 days, supposedly enjoying a week of rest and reconnection after months of intense work. James had hoped this trip would bring them closer again, that it would silence the doubts growing inside his head. But now, feeling the emptiness beside him, James realized it might already be too late. He waited about 5 minutes before getting up. He quickly pulled on shorts and a t-shirt, grabbed his phone, and left the room. The hotel hallway was quiet, lit only by small lights along the baseboards. James walked to the front desk, but Lauren wasn't there. He went outside and followed the path leading to the beach. The sound of waves crashing against the shore was steady, almost hypnotic. The night breeze carried the scent of salt and a sense of freedom that, at that moment, felt bitterly ironic. That's when he saw her. Lauren was on the beach, near one of the closed kiosks. But she wasn't alone. A man stood with her. They were standing far too close for a casual conversation. James stopped behind a palm tree, his body taut like a tightly wound rope. He watched as the man touched Lauren's face, as she tilted her head and smiled in a way James hadn't seen in months. Then they kissed. James couldn't move. He couldn't shout, couldn't run over and interrupt the scene. He just stood there, hidden like an unwelcome spectator watching his own life fall apart. After a few minutes that felt like hours, Lauren and the man pulled apart. She walked back along the main path while the man headed in the opposite direction, toward another wing of the resort. James waited until both were out of sight before returning to the room. He got back before Lauren and lay down again, pretending to sleep. When she came in, he heard every movement, the soft creak of the door, her light footsteps on the carpet, the whisper of fabric as she took off her robe and got back into bed. She lay down beside him as if nothing had happened, as if she hadn't just shattered 10 years of marriage on a deserted beach. James didn't sleep the rest of the night. His mind raced in circles, trying to process what he'd seen. Part of him wanted to shake Lauren and demand answers right then and there. But another part, the part that was starting to take over, knew he needed more information. He wasn't going to confront her based on just one scene. He needed to know how deep this went, who that man was, and how long it had been going on. The next morning, James woke up and acted as if everything were normal. They had breakfast together on the room's balcony, talked about their plans for the day, and laughed at silly jokes. Lauren seemed relaxed, maybe even more affectionate than she'd been in recent days. James noticed she seemed relieved, probably thinking she'd gotten away with it the night before. While Lauren was in the shower, James discreetly picked up her phone. He knew the passcode, she'd never had a reason to hide it from him, or at least that's what he'd always believed. He opened her messages and found a conversation with a contact saved only as M. The texts were explicit, filled with promises and plans. James read every word, his stomach churning with a cold, quiet rage. They'd been seeing each other for at least 3 months. M was at the resort with his own family, which made everything even more repulsive. James took photos of the conversation with his own phone and put hers back exactly where he'd found it. When Lauren stepped out of the bathroom, he was standing by the window, apparently admiring the ocean view. She came up behind him and wrapped her arms around his waist. "Everything okay, honey?" she asked, her voice sweet and concerned. "Of course," James replied, turning to kiss her forehead. "Just thinking about how good it is to be here with you." Lauren smiled, and James noticed how that smile didn't quite reach her eyes, or maybe he'd just never paid close enough attention before. Over the next 2 days, James became a detective in his own vacation. He watched Lauren discreetly, noting when she checked her phone more often, when she styled her hair a certain way before leaving the room. He also started paying attention to the other guests. It was during lunch at the main restaurant that he identified the man. He was seated 3 tables ahead, with a woman and 2 small children. He was handsome, James reluctantly admitted, the kind of guy who drew attention without trying. The man's wife looked tired, occupied with getting the kids to eat while he fiddled with his phone. James saw him glance discreetly in Lauren's direction, a small smile flickering on his lips. Lauren didn't return the look, but James noticed how her posture stiffened, how suddenly aware she became of herself. That's when James got the idea. He spent the next few hours alone in the room while Lauren was at the pool, letting his anger and pain settle into something colder and sharper. James wasn't impulsive by nature. His career as a project manager had trained his mind to think strategically, always 3 steps ahead. Now, with the evidence in hand and the other man identified, he realized he had a unique opportunity. It wasn't enough to just confront Lauren in private. He felt he needed to reveal the truth in front of the person who'd also been deceived. That woman, Jennifer, who likely had no idea her husband was cheating while pretending to be a devoted family man, deserved to know who she was really married to. That afternoon, while Lauren was still at the pool, James went to the resort's front desk. He spoke with the manager, a man named Ricardo who'd been especially attentive since their arrival. James explained that he wanted to arrange a special surprise dinner to celebrate their wedding anniversary, which had been a few days earlier but hadn't been properly celebrated yet. He wanted to reserve a large table at the resort's best restaurant for that same evening. "Can I ask a special favor?" James said, keeping his tone casual. "There's another couple staying here. They have 2 young kids. They're always by the pool." He discreetly showed Ricardo a photo he'd taken during lunch, where the family appeared in the background. "I briefly spoke to the husband near the bar yesterday and mentioned it'd be nice to have dinner together. I'd like you to extend the invitation officially." Ricardo studied the photo and nodded, recognizing the guests. "Ah yes, Cottage 47. A pleasant family." "No problem, Mr. James. I'll personally deliver the invitation." James also asked that the invitation be framed as an official resort courtesy to a friendly family. The table would be at 8 that night, in a slightly more private section of the restaurant, but still visible to other guests. When James returned to the room, Lauren was getting ready for dinner. He hadn't told her about the special plans, just mentioned he'd made a reservation to celebrate. She was wearing a red dress he didn't recognize, elegant and figure-hugging. She was making an effort, he realized. But not for him. "You look beautiful," James said, and it was true. Lauren had always been beautiful. That just made everything more painful. When they arrived at the restaurant, James saw the confusion on Lauren's face as she noticed there weren't just 2 chairs at their table, but 6. Before she could ask, the manager appeared with a wide smile. "Mr. James, wonderful. Your special dinner is all set. And look, the couple you mentioned just arrived." James turned and saw the man from the beach approaching with his wife and children. The man's expression shifted from confusion to sheer terror in seconds. Lauren went pale beside James, her fingers gripping her purse too tightly. "Good evening. James greeted with forced enthusiasm, extending his hand. "So glad you could join us. I'm James, and this is my wife, Lauren." The man hesitated before shaking James's hand. "Marcus," he said, his voice hoarse. "This is my wife, Jennifer." Jennifer smiled, completely unaware of the tension thick in the air. "How lovely." The kids were excited when they heard about the invitation. "We don't always make new friends on trips like this." They all took their seats, and what followed was one of the most surreal experiences of James's life. He steered the conversation with ease, asking questions, laughing at the right moments, making sure the kids were comfortable. Lauren and Marcus barely looked at each other, and when they did, it was with panic and desperation. James waited until the main courses were served. The kids were busy with their mini burgers, and Jennifer was telling a story about their trip the previous year. That's when James decided it was time. "You know, Jennifer," James began, politely interrupting, "there's something I need to share with you, and with everyone here." Silence fell over the table. Lauren was as pale as paper. Marcus looked like he was about to be sick. "2 nights ago, I woke up and realized my wife wasn't in our room. I got worried, so I went looking for her." James kept his tone calm, almost conversational. "I found Lauren on the beach. She was with your husband, Jennifer. And they weren't exactly stargazing." Jennifer blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" "They were kissing," James said simply. "And from the messages I found on Lauren's phone, this has been going on for months." The world seemed to freeze. Jennifer looked at Marcus, who dropped his fork and was staring at his plate as if he wished he could vanish.